The story that I'm about to tell you is not the one that I expected would unfold when I began this journey. A few months ago, I conducted an experiment. I wanted to attempt to understand Lost Ark as a Final Fantasy XIV player while documenting that experience to share with you. At first, I committed to playing for at least 100 hours, but I quickly realized that wouldn't be enough. Ultimately, I invested 500 hours, but the result was worth it. My video about that journey was a success and received high praise from many of Lost Ark's most prolific content creators.
This is a good video. I need to he actually is saying not stupid shit.
Given that warm reception, I looked for an opportunity to repeat that experiment in a different game, so I found myself reinstalling Final Fantasy XIV's greatest rival, World of Warcraft. This time, things are a bit different, however. I'm no stranger to Warcraft the way I was to Lost Ark. My connection to this intellectual property stretches throughout my life. When I was in middle school, my cousins would take me out to a local PC cafe to play Kodo Tag in Warcraft 3. My father and I played World of Warcraft together at the time until I decided to quit in high school to focus on my studies. I have fond memories of reading Richard A. Knack's The War of the Ancients trilogy late into the night. Even now, with a career and an office set up in my apartment, I frequently listen to this 3-hour-long Elwyn Forest music and ambience video while I'm working from home. All this to say, the title is misleading. I have thousands of hours invested into World of Warcraft throughout my life. Rather, for the sake of the experiment being conducted in this video, I've played 500 hours of World of Warcraft since making a home in Final Fantasy XIV nearly 5 years ago. In the last 2.5 years, World of Warcraft and Blizzard itself has suffered severe damage to its reputation. From Chinese censorship to salacious lawsuits and, worst of all, Korthia. Attitudes towards the game were at their lowest and there seemed little hope for reconciliation.
And you really want to still want to try and simp for that company.
All right. 1 minute 40 seconds. That's how long the enraged timer for this fight is.
For a time, there appeared to be a mass exodus from World of Warcraft towards Final Fantasy XIV, which begs the question, why go in the other direction? Why commit 500 hours to what is, according to the court of public opinion, a worse game? 2 reasons. First, content. I'll wager that this video will be infinitely more interesting than watching streamers react to each other over a chair. Second, because World of Warcraft continues to be, by every perceivable metric, the king of the hill of the MMO genre. In spite of a myriad controversies, abject failures, and a stubborn refusal to design their systems in a way that would be enjoyable to anyone, the game is thriving, dominating on Twitch, and at the precipice of a new era with classic management at the helm. I wanted to understand why. Could I discover, with enough commitment, that special something that keeps players coming back to World of Warcraft? Or would I drift right back to Final Fantasy XIV, driven away by the game's many flaws? This was my experience as an FF14 player after 500 hours of World of Warcraft. I want to start at the beginning, but not without a quick preview of what's to come. You're watching footage of me clearing Farak on normal Amirdrasil with my guild. Not only am I our raid team's main tank, I somehow ended up as the guild's raid leader. By the time you see this video, we'll be progressing heroic, which will eventually culminate into my first time achieving ahead of the curve in my brief World of Warcraft raiding career. This is quite a bit more involvement than I bargained for when I began this experiment. I went from playing 14 to being neck deep in spreadsheets, schedules, and strategies in a matter of days. Not to mention the responsibility of leading a group of raiders with more experience in World of Warcraft than I have. I am in over my head, you might say. Later on in the video, I'll talk about how I ended up in that position and what I've learned from that experience. First things first, however. As I mentioned before, I played World of Warcraft early in life before my high school workload made it impossible to keep playing. I quit during Wrath of the Lich King, and I wouldn't return to the game for about 10 years. Did you do the math? That's right. I went from Wrath of the Lich King, one of World of Warcraft's most beloved expansions, to Shadowlands, a veritable dumpster fire of an expansion that also managed to set a sales record for PC gaming. Remember kids, if you're gonna fail, do it upwards. Needless to say, it was a culture shock and I hated just about every minute of it. The game's narrative did nothing to prepare me for a jaunt through super jail in hell. All the while, it introduced some of the most loathsome and boring characters I've ever had the misfortune of interacting with. And it was built around a series of untenable systems that felt like filing administrative paperwork at the DMV.
Conduits. So conduits were pretty bad.
Somehow it only got worse with the release of Chains of Domination, patch 9.1. All the while, the studio itself was embroiled in one of the most public controversies in the history of the gaming industry. You would be right to assume that I logged right back into Final Fantasy XIV without looking back. Thing is, that isn't entirely true, because I did look back. A furtive glance here, a quick peek there. Something about the moment-to-moment gameplay of World of Warcraft in its modern iteration sparked an intrigue that I couldn't let go of. Just as I remembered from my childhood, World of Warcraft's hotkey combat was still the best in the business, and it had evidently improved as time passed. Even if doing mod dailies was abysmally boring and running Torghast for Soul Ash was about as fun as a colonoscopy, I couldn't deny that the gameplay felt really good. Loath as I was to admit it, it felt better than Final Fantasy XIV, so I watched and I waited for any indication that the game would become worth playing and that its fundamental issues would be addressed. With the release of Dragonflight, the game began to approach that ideal. All the while, the tables turned in this ongoing Cold War between World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. While Endwalker's narrative was incredible, even going so far as elevating A Realm Reborn retroactively, and its content was enjoyable for a time, I found myself feeling a sense of boredom with the game. Some of you who have played Final Fantasy XIV will understand this sentiment. Although there are certainly many things to do, I'd log in and think to myself, there's nothing to do. That boredom was largely responsible for the existence of this channel, as a matter of fact. In something of an inverse of the summer of 2021, World of Warcraft began to look like the greener pasture, and while the game still has many of the same fundamental issues that drove me away during Shadowlands, the question of which game is better became less clear as I began my deep descent into the World of Warcraft. I want to front load this video with a list of all the things that I believe the retail version of World of Warcraft gets wrong in terms of MMORPG design. I am aware that for some of the points I'll make, there are features in the War Within which will address these issues, but they still warrant mentioning. First, World of Warcraft is entirely confused on whether or not it is a narrative-driven live service game. When you watch some of WoW's most well-constructed cutscenes, they indicate a strong commitment to storytelling from the developers.
So tell me, is he the Banshee's puppet? Crammed full of blight? Is he the bomb this time?
Since I've spoken as much as I have about how terrible Shadowlands was, I'll drop a Surface of the Sun hot take and present to you one of my favorite cutscenes that Blizzard has ever published.
Despite all your grand designs, there's still some shred of your mortality haunting you. As if the Banshee Queen hasn't entirely eclipsed the Ranger General.
Don't.
Although the broader experience of Shadowlands' plot was weapons-grade cringe, these moments between Anduin and Sylvanas were excellent, every single one of them. The dialogue is packed with subtext, which the vocal performers do a fantastic job of drawing out. The animation, too, is stellar across the board. These cutscenes are of an undeniably high quality, however you may feel about the game's storytelling overall. The issue arises when you compare the amount of effort invested into these cutscenes against the way the narrative is delivered to the player base. There is incredible work being invested into these projects. Look at their subtle facial animations. Listen to the creaking of leather as Sylvanas tightens her grip on the hilt of Kingsmore. Watch the light from the nearby brazier dance upon their faces. Why was this cutscene revealed to me via an upload on YouTube? There is a total disconnect between the amount of work that goes into the construction of these cutscenes versus the way that Blizzard stewards World of Warcraft's unfolding story. I'm honestly confused. The quality of the work suggests that the story is important, but the dismissive way that it's delivered suggests that it's an afterthought. Even in Dragonflight, this trend continues, with a slew of unique problems of its own. For instance, much of Dragonflight's story quests are locked behind renown, which speaks to yet another fundamental issue with the game regarding progress parity between characters, one that I'll get into in a moment. Early on during my time with Dragonflight, I switched my intended main character from an evoker to a demon hunter, which meant that all of the renown progress that I had acquired on my evoker, this included the completion of every side quest in every location on the Dragon Isles, counted for almost nothing save a reputation bonus for the game's various factions. As a result, I have still not completed most of the story content in the game, and I'm liable to never complete it because I've altogether lost interest in chasing after renown ranks after being made to start all over for committing the great sin of switching characters. In addition, the way that the game treats your completion of the ongoing campaign of Dragonflight seems equally as confused as the treatment of the overarching narrative. For example, I completed the 10.1 campaign on my evoker, but I completed the 10.2 campaign on my demon hunter. According to my demon hunter's quest log, however, I have not completed the 10.1 campaign. Not to mention the decade-long gap in story that I missed during my time away from World of Warcraft. If I hadn't read the War of the Ancients trilogy, then I would have absolutely no idea about the lore of Warcraft, because the game is unable to decide if it matters whether or not the player base is clued into the game's unfolding narrative. You're thrown into Battle for Azeroth as a returning player, leaving behind hundreds of hours of story, world building, and character developments. World of Warcraft is in desperate need of a start-to-finish narrative throughline that allows a player to completely immerse themselves in the rich history of the game. Although it may have been tedious at certain points, Final Fantasy XIV commits completely to its narrative, and it it does not apologize for that choice. World of Warcraft, on the other hand, seems embarrassed of its own story, relegating its grandest moments to a YouTube video rather than a moment for players to earn in-game. The second fundamental flaw with World of Warcraft is one that may be altogether repaired with the launch of The War Within and the addition of warbands to the game. I understand that, but it was and continues to be an issue during my 500-hour journey into this game. There is no parity between characters. As I mentioned a moment ago, leveling a new character feels like a punishment in World of Warcraft, rather than simply an opportunity to experience the game's moment-to-moment combat through the perspective of a new role or class. Whenever I log onto my Demon Hunter, who was not the character that I used to earn the expansion's Lore Master achievement, I have to simply ignore the quest markers in the world that I know I've already completed. Perhaps it's a small thing, but it bothers me to no end that my interface is cluttered by icons that, by all rights, should no longer be there. I've already done that. Renown, as I mentioned, is also character-bound rather than account-wide, which is a massive point of contention for me as I played the game. Professions, too, are locked to individual characters, which is frustrating for a player like me who generally enjoys playing one character. I can't simply learn herbalism and alchemy since my Demon Hunter is already a miner and a blacksmith. I have to invest into leveling an entirely new character who receives none of my reputation progress, none of my renown progress, and not even my secondary profession progress, such as fishing and archaeology. Famously, 14 allows players to learn, earn, and complete every available piece of content in the game on a single character. It is, in every sense of the word, the truest form of account-wide progression that I've ever experienced in an MMO, and it blows World of Warcraft out of the water. The last fundamental flaw that I discovered upon my return to WoW was the abandonment of the game's older content. I describe World of Warcraft in its current state as a well-constructed game as long as you remain confined to the Dragon Isles. When you step back to examine the whole picture, however, it appears more like a single functioning organ surrounded by a crowd of vestigial ones. There is no reasonable avenue that I could take in order to experience the whole of a previous expansion's story and content. My best bet is to create a new character and level it through each expansion in chronological order, but that barely qualifies as a solution. Because leveling is as swift as it is, you quickly reach level 60, at which point time walking ends and you're forced to go to the Dragon Isles, putting a premature end to your journey through, let's say, Wrath of the Lich King or Warlords of Draenor. Returning to those areas to complete any unfinished business isn't a great option either, because you will severely outscale every enemy in the zone, leading to a mind-numbingly boring experience. It must be extremely frustrating to be a developer at Blizzard who worked tirelessly to bring Pandaria to life, for example, only for it to be relegated to the basement full of other forgotten, meaningless pieces of content. Final Fantasy XIV's solution to this issue is simple yet elegant. I took a break during my playthrough of Endwalker immediately after the totally unexpected level 83 trial. Those of you who know, but mostly because of the strange discovery made immediately afterwards. Still, I wanted a break from the MSQ, which gave me the opportunity to work backwards through the game's content and complete some raid series that I had initially skipped. With the brilliance of the Duty Roulette system, I was able to experience the Omega series, the Eden series, the Ivalice Alliance raids, the Nier Alliance raids, and so many other optional pieces of content as though they were brand new to the game. 14 is a holistic experience, while WoW is an atomistic experience. The former ensures that every piece of content added to the game throughout its life cycle is relevant and easily accessible. The latter overwrites itself and begins anew with each expansion. Will The War Within solve some of these fundamental issues with World of Warcraft? There's plenty to talk about regarding the future of this game, especially as 14 prepares to turn a page in its own life cycle, but that'll be for a later chapter in this video. First, let's talk about that special something I alluded to at the beginning of the video, because I think I may have found it. We've established that World of Warcraft isn't perfect, so what is it about the game that seems to draw its players back in, fair weather or otherwise? In order to find that answer, I think you need to join a guild. Listen, I understand that when some players air their grievances about the game, say in regards to bugging Mythic Plus dungeons or raids, one of the responses that established veterans like to give is to simply join a guild. This is frustrating to hear, I know, but they're right. Without joining a guild, this video would be considerably shorter and significantly less interesting. Tell me if I get anything wrong here. You're a casual World of Warcraft player who, for the most part, plays the game alone, maybe runs a few +2s in a season, and otherwise doesn't bother with a raid difficulty higher than LFR. You have, on a few occasions, joined guilds that invited you on a whim, who promised weekly raid events, organized Mythic Plus groups, and a lively community on Discord. You have found, on nearly every occasion, that those guilds have failed to meet their stated intentions, so you continue playing alone until you inevitably unsubscribe, waiting for the next major content patch to pull you back, only to repeat the process. I know, I've been there, I've done that. I realized, and not as quickly as I'd like to admit, that the problem was never the guilds, but rather my unwillingness to participate in building a community. It's my opinion that World of Warcraft players, particularly the more casual among us, expect a guild to proactively engineer a more enjoyable experience for its members. In actuality, the opposite is true. You receive from your guild what you invest into it, and not the other way around. One day, as I was beginning this 500-hour experiment, I received one of these sudden guild invitations. I accepted, and for the sake of this video, I pushed myself to the forefront of the guild's development in order to have a more interesting story to tell. When the guildmaster began searching for a raid leader, I volunteered for the task, which came with a slew of responsibilities. Suddenly, the pressure was on. 2 nights a week, 2 hours per night, I would have to perform. I'd have to answer questions, communicate strategies, and establish an environment that would keep our budding raid group from falling apart. As you saw at the beginning of Chapter 1, I was and continue to be a successful raid leader, but only through study, preparation, and a penchant for public speaking, as well as a willingness to give before expecting to receive. As I continue to foster this community that I stumbled into, or that stumbled into me, those bonds of friendship and trust make the intimidating portions of the game more palatable. For years, even before coming back to World of Warcraft for the purpose of making this video, I heard nothing but negativity around the Mythic Plus system. Players trade in horror stories about doomed pugs, depleted keys, and traumatizing player interactions. The reality in my experience has revealed the opposite to be true. After running keys with my guildmates, which came with the benefits of a more easygoing environment, I had no issues with listing my own keys in the group finder and succeeding. In the last 500 hours of gameplay, I've pugged most of my Mythic Plus runs, all but one of which ended in a timed clear. I have rarely had a negative interaction with another player, despite WoW's reputation. Sure, it hasn't been saccharine, sickly sweet like it is in 14, but I have received from nearly everyone either complete silence or mutual respect, which is all that any of us can reasonably ask for. I discovered that I had stepped into Dragonflight with some preconceived notions given to me by content creators and the discourse about what World of Warcraft is like to play at the endgame. After forcing myself to actually interact with the game, all of those notions fell away, revealing that special something that I've been talking about. Let me start with this. Raiding in Mythic Plus is not inaccessible or new player unfriendly. The truth is that with a modicum of practice and preparation, these pillars of WoW's endgame content should be easily surmountable by the vast majority of MMO players. I am not an above average gamer. I spend most of my time writing scripts and editing video, but dedicating a few minutes to establishing my opener, practicing my rotation, researching dungeon layouts, and understanding boss encounters has set me up for success. These are things that anyone can do, and if you're willing to do them, then you get access to some of the best gameplay in the MMO market. And in that gameplay is World of Warcraft's special something. I'm aware that there are action combat MMOs out there, namely Lost Ark, that do it best, but when it comes to tab targeting combat, World of Warcraft is still in the lead after almost 20 years. I would generally defend Final Fantasy XIV's combat despite its floaty feel and its lack of tactile responsiveness, because I appreciate the rhythmic dance of a well-executed opener. It reminds me of playing a fighting game, which is where I like to spend most of my non-MMO free time, due to the specific timing required to weave abilities between each global cooldown. 14's combat has its merits, I want to make that explicitly clear. But not only do I find World of Warcraft's combat to be more kinetic, frenetic, and engaging, I find that combat to exist within a design framework that is simply more playable than Final Fantasy XIV. Here's what I mean. When I log on to Final Fantasy XIV, I am typically in Limsa Lominsa, which is a vibrant social space for the game. But in order to reach gameplay, I have to navigate menus, queue times, and loading screens. Sure, there are tribal quests and fates out in the open world, but let's be honest, those are more effective as sleeping aids than avenues for gameplay. Everything is facilitated by a system, which gives the game a feeling of being shuffled through an institution rather than existing in a living world. That isn't to say that menus, queue times, and loading screens don't exist in World of Warcraft, but I can, and often do, simply log in and play. I'm in Valdrakken, I hop on my personalized dragon, I fly in any direction and just play the game. The urgency to participate in the game's seasonal treadmill is also a strong motivator for tackling increasingly difficult keys in Mythic Plus. So I always feel like there's something to do and that the outcome for doing it is meaningful and it proportionately rewards me for my time investment. Making incremental improvements to my item level by earning a gear upgrade, or upgrading my existing gear, or turning a piece of gear into a tier piece is a reward mechanism that simply does not feel the same in Final Fantasy XIV. My experience as a relative newcomer to the endgame loop of the modern version of World of Warcraft has been a highly gratifying series of scaling challenges in pursuit of greater power in order to overcome further scaling challenges. There's also something that I like to call competitive cooperation in World of Warcraft that I don't feel in 14, particularly since the amount of responsibility on each of the 8 players involved in the fight is much higher than it is spread across a 25-player raid group in WoW. Your attention is focused on completing the encounter, not on the player beside you. I call this collaborative cooperation, which is arguably more positive. You should be focused on the boss rather than the damage meters, of course. I will be the first to admit, however, that I have found WoW's more competitive cooperation to be highly engaging. There's a bit more pressure to compete against your cohorts, not just against the boss in front of you. In an uncontrolled environment, say a pugged mythic dungeon or raid, this can lead to negative results and unpleasant player interactions. However, in a more controlled environment, it can also create a healthy competition between players, which benefits the raid group as a whole. It's a modicum of pressure that will either break you or make you seek every available avenue to improve your damage output. If you can handle it, and I cannot stress enough how easy it is to exceed expectations by simply reading a guide and following its directions, then you might find yourself enjoying the intrinsic reward of doing a shit of damage and topping the meters during a heroic raid. It really is a shame that I allowed external voices to convince me that Mythic Plus was a horrendous, cynical cesspit of despair, and that raiding is a needlessly difficult practice and futility for meager rewards. Washing away those preconceived notions and forcing myself to focus, practice, and succeed at World of Warcraft's pillars of endgame has been an eye-opening experience. Similar to my 500-hour romp through Lost Ark, which taught me that there is value in grappling with the high expectations of a vertical progression system, World of Warcraft has showed me the value of competitive cooperation, an involved gearing process, and the urgency to succeed within the confines of a seasonal structure. Content creation in the MMORPG space is generally lackluster, save for a few bright spots of creativity and innovation. This is most evident in the creation of the same video over and over again. It's some variation of, here are the new MMORPGs coming out this month, here are the new MMORPGs coming out this year, or what MMORPGs should you play. The reason why these types of videos exist is because they resonate with their intended audience, and the reason that they resonate with their intended audience is because MMORPGs, unlike any other genre of video game, are an extension of the individual player rather than simply a space in which to play. Investing your time, energy, and a healthy sum of money into a digital ecosystem is a risk that, as we all get older, becomes increasingly difficult to take. Thus, players must be incredulous as they discern what game to call home. And one of the primary metrics players use to determine a potential home is whether or not people give a shit about the game. As much as I enjoyed my time with Lost Ark, for example, it's difficult to log in and invest further into my roster, knowing that the game's population has steadily declined since its release and there's no indication that the game will reverse its misfortunes. Another example, Guild Wars 2 has reportedly seen a doubling in its player numbers over the last few years, but the game occupies absolutely none of the mindshare in the culture of MMOs, so it's often passed over and altogether ignored. Again, people don't seem to give a shit, so why should I? In my own home game, Final Fantasy XIV is preparing to lay the foundations of another 10 years of storytelling, but the upcoming Dawntrail expansion has presented little indication of any structural improvements to the game. We're getting a graphical update, that's pretty cool, we're getting new jobs, yeah, love that, but otherwise, the structure of the expansion appears to be the same template used to construct every expansion since Stormblood. However, something intriguing is stirring in World of Warcraft with the announcement of the game's next 3 expansions, a series of changes to the game's foundational elements that will improve its quality of life, and the return of Chris Metzen. I've talked about this in a previous video, but there is simply more to be excited about in the World of Warcraft ecosystem than there is in Final Fantasy XIV's. While there is a non-zero possibility that the World Soul Saga is a total train wreck, just the idea alone of a radical change coming to the game is exciting enough, and there is a palpable buzz in the WoW community. Knowing that an MMO has a future ahead of it is almost as important as whether or not the MMO is fun to play right now. It means that your time, energy, and financial investment in the ecosystem is relatively secure and worthwhile. This isn't to suggest that Final Fantasy XIV doesn't have a bright future ahead of it. I'm sure that Dawntrail is going to be wonderful, and that Creative Business Unit 3 will, as they always have, exceeded my expectations. I'm simply suggesting that in the last 500 hours of dedicated investment into World of Warcraft, I feel that my efforts have not only been proportionately rewarded, but that they will continue to be valuable for years to come as the game continues to thrive. But Blizzard has proved us all wrong before, so I won't hold my breath. Still, I have a sneaking suspicion that WoW's best years are ahead of it. On top of that, the cost of my subscription has only increased in value as Blizzard takes a page out of Jagex's book, offering remixed iterations of the version of World of Warcraft that made me fall in love with the game in the first place. Season of Discovery has presented me with one of the best dilemmas an MMO player can encounter. I'm having too much fun and I can't pick what to play. While World of Warcraft is still behind Final Fantasy XIV in many respects, it is evident to me that the MMO with the brightest future right now is World of Warcraft. If you would have told me, as I was neck deep in anima and farming Maw dailies 3 years ago, that I would have written, recorded, and published that last sentence, I would have laughed in your face and probably beat the shit out of you, yet here we are. As I write this script, I'm fairly confident that this video will be the longest upload I've had in the short history of this channel. I'm on the 10th page of this Google document, and I'm writing in Times New Roman with a font size of 11 and a line spacing of 1.15. I haven't written anything quite this extensive since college, yet I still feel like it won't be enough to encapsulate the extent of the last 500 hours. This is why I make videos for this channel. More than any other genre of video game, MMOs are endlessly interesting, but 10 pages feels like a nice, even number to bring us to our conclusion. Final Fantasy XIV affected me on a profound level that no other game, MMO or otherwise, can compare to. I didn't think I cared too deeply about narrative outside of film, television, or literature until the credits rolled for Endwalker and I sat in my office crying tears of joy. What a feeling. If I could forget it and do it all again, I would in a heartbeat. World of Warcraft can never offer that to me. The tone of its story is constantly shifting between bleak and silly, usually settling on sanitized, inoffensive therapy session rather than something substantial. And there's just not enough care in stewarding the player's journey into the world of Azeroth. While I am hopeful that the World Soul Saga will elevate the quality of World of Warcraft storytelling, I cannot be convinced that it will ever come close to the experience of Final Fantasy XIV. What World of Warcraft gets right, however, is where 14 is lacking. Logging into Limsa Lominsa and only seeing advertisements for nightclubs in the chat makes the world feel strangely lonely. I miss the frenetic trade chat with all of the crafters advertising their services in search of work, all of the newly formed and doomed casual guilds looking to recruit other non-committal casuals, and a bunch of idiot fury warriors arguing about Middle Eastern geopolitics that just doesn't exist in 14. I also love that upon logging in, I can immediately play the game. I'm not surfing menus or sending my retainers out for quick exploration. I'm on a dragon and I'm flying. I love the aggressive, kinetic, and satisfying gameplay that leads you through the endgame content, as well as the promise of powerful trinkets, set pieces, and stat increases at the other end. I love the collective mad dash towards the Great Vault every Tuesday to see if we'll be rewarded or disappointed that week. I love that Season of Discovery exists at all. The last 500 hours in World of Warcraft have been a blur, but I don't regret embarking on this journey for a second. As this video goes live, my guild and I are closing in on Heroic Farak. Then, who knows? Perhaps I'll have another story to tell when this experiment reaches the 1,000-hour mark. Until then, stay tuned. Against my better judgment, I am on social media. You can follow me on X. My handle is in the description. More importantly, follow me on Twitch. I would love to stream, but I'm not streaming to an empty room, so if enough of you follow me there, I will hit the big red button. Go ahead and let me know what you think I should be playing next in the comments. Feel free to leave some feedback in the form of a like or a dislike. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more content like this. And minding my manners, of course. Thanks for watching.